What's up, brand builders? Stephen Hurahan here on the Brand Master Podcast, and in this episode, I'm joined by Emmanuel Probst, author, marketer, and brand strategist with over 17 years of experience. Now, for those who don't know him, Emmanuel is a strategist who's passionate about building brands that don't just sell, but transform people and the world that they live in. He teaches students the tools they need to become successful brand strategists at UCLA. He hones his craft at Ipsos, helping clients to measure and amplify how brands and consumers connect. And he shares the fruits of all of his know-how and experience in his books, Brand Hacks, and his latest, Assemblage, the art and science of brand transformation, earning accolades from the likes of David Aaker, Jonah, Berger, and Rory, Sutherland, to name just a few. And in this episode, we explore how brand perception is the truth, how to use brands to shape consumers' perceptions, and how data and insights can be used to deliver a personalized consumer experience. So if you want to learn brand strategy from a well-respected brand strategy professor, author, and executor, then don't miss this episode of the Brand Master Podcast. Now, before we dive into the episode, I want to take a second to show some appreciation. I appreciate every single one of our listeners, but I have a soft spot for listeners who share the love. A shout out to Short Circle 123 from Canada. I'm a student of Stephen's Brandmaster Academy, and his strategy course has done wonders for the design services I offer at Raven. I'm looking forward to the strategic value bombs he's going to offer in these podcasts. If you want to share the love and possibly get a shout out on the podcast, please take a couple of minutes to leave a review on your favorite platform. Welcome to the Brandmaster Podcast, a show specialized in helping branding professionals and entrepreneurs to build brands using strategy, psychology, and creative thinking. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Master Podcast. And I'm absolutely delighted to have with me on the show today, Emmanuel Probst. Emmanuel, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me on the show and for this opportunity to connect with you and your listeners. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Now, I'm really interested in your background and specifically the area that you deal with, because we're going to talk about a couple of books that you've written that I covered, in the introduction section of this podcast, which is Brand Hacks and then Assemblage, the science and psychology behind brand transformation. I might have butchered that a little bit, but I think it's thereabouts. And really what I want to get into with you is really that understanding of the science and psychology about how brands connect. But before I start attacking you with questions, can you give us a little bit of a background as to where you've come from and how you fell into this really niche area of the science behind branding?
Yeah, Stephen, I come from a passion for understanding why do people do what they do. So you asked for an introduction, and I do three things. I'm global lead for brand thought leadership at Ipsos. I also teach consumer market research at the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA, and obviously I write my books. And what those three things have in common, and what has kept me on my toes for the last 17 plus years, is exactly this, is to understand why do people do what they do. And as you said, I come from a perspective of consumer psychology, so that as marketing and advertising professionals, we can build stronger brands. That is my passion, if you will.
Yeah, and look, and we share 100% similar passions. Obviously, you've kind of deep dive into a very specific segment of branding that I have a real interest in, and you've kind of made that your life's work. And something that you said before also really kind of resonates with me. It's why we do what we do, and aligning that with the brands that we build and connecting those brands to people, because when it comes to people, there's always a reason behind what we do, and the more we understand about the psychology and the neuroscience behind how our brains work and how we interact, the better we are prepared as marketers, as brand builders, to make those connections with people. Do you adopt this human brand philosophy that the brands that we build are human entities that we're building to connect with other people?
I think so. Yes, the short answer. I hear two things in what you're saying. Is one, the opportunity, and I will say the imperative to humanize the brand and humanize organizations to make them more relatable and reduce what we call the social distance between the brand and the user. So that's where authenticity is important. That's where demonstrating a purpose becomes important. That's where, as I like to say, imperfect is perfect. And what I mean by this is a brand and its representatives, they don't have to always be perfect. They can have flaws. They can make mistakes as long as they intend to improve themselves. And so that's very important. And then you asked about how do people communicate, and that touches on what we call in academia symbolic interactionism. And I don't want to get too philosophical on this podcast, but what this means, symbolic interactionism, is people use symbols and brands to communicate. So what this means is together as individuals with our group of friends, with our relatives and significant other and whatnot, we use objects and we use brands to define, to communicate and to define what reality is for us. So what this means is we might together create meaning for Nike sneakers, for example, or for a certain brand of toothpaste, or for a certain brand of beauty products. What does this mean to us, and how do we relate around this product and around this brand?
And I think what you touched on there really kind of brings the significance of perceptions into play as the arena that brands operate in. Because, when we talk about brands, of course we see brands on billboards, we see brands on screens, we see brands on products, but really brands kind of live and die in the mind as a perception. And those perceptions, in my experience and through my philosophy, they are built over time through different touch points. How have you seen in your experience, improved ways that we can use to shape those perceptions in the mind of the audience?
Yeah, you said, I hear three things, Stephen, that are important. Brands are perception. Absolutely, the short answer. What's important is how does the audience define your brand? In other words, as a marketer, the brand is not what you say it is. The brand is what they say it is. The second aspect is, you said those perceptions, they live and die. And I would say they evolve over time. And so the second aspect that seems important in what you said, Stephen, is brands are dynamic. They're dynamically created. They're not static, or I should say they're no longer static. That's why it's so important with social media and the ability for people to talk back at brands. And we can talk about it further. And the last aspect, you spoke about perception. And there's a chapter in my latest book, Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation, that says perception is the truth. What I mean by this is we construct our own truths based on our perception of the world and based on the information we are exposed to, and frankly, in a way, based on what we want the truth to be. And in marketing, it's really important to remember that what matters is how people perceive the brand, not what the brand and the products really are.
I really like that as well, because, and it kind of ties into, when we go back to, the classic books like Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout, talking about positioning being the battle for the mind, because at the end of the day, the battle that's going on is in the consumer's mind. And as brand builders, we don't position our brands. The consumer positions their brand, the brands that are out there in the market, in their mind based on their own truths. And what brands can do is they can put messages into the market. They can design the experience to shape those touch points, but ultimately it will be the consumer and their experiences and their engagement with the market that will determine where your brand is positioned. How important do you think are brand associations and for brands aligning with particular ideas and associations to create those perceptions in the mind of the audience?
Yeah, I'm happy to build on what you said. Reflect on brand associations and how brands are created in the mind of people. We were saying earlier, Stephen, brands are no longer static, brands are dynamic. And we spoke about perception, and I was alluding to the process of co-creation. And we can expand on this to say 5, 7, 9 years ago, brand strategists could mostly dictate what the brand should stand for. You put a brand playbook out there and you tell people what it is. The way the world has evolved is that brands are now or should be co-created with the audience.
Yes.
That's what I meant. And that's where I'm linking back to what you said about brand associations and perception. So this process of co-creation is important, and here's why. People now can easily communicate with the brand. People can promote the brand. The concept is not new. However, they can do this at scale. When 10 years ago, you could promote the brand to 7 to 10 people around you. Now you can do so to hundreds, thousands, dozens of thousands of followers on social media. That said, people can also be detractors and even cancel the brand. Pardon me. And therefore, people expect to be involved in this process of co-creation. So what I mean by this is, as brand strategists, you can define the key building pillars, the foundation of what your brand stands for. And you have to be willing to be vulnerable, and you have to be willing to engage in this process of co-creation with your audience to define what the brand stands for and what they want the brand to be.
So how do we do that then? How do we co-create with our audience? And you've touched now a couple of times on brand authenticity, and it's something that I very much believe in. I don't see it as a buzzword that brands shouldn't be authentic, or there's a lot of brands misrepresenting authenticity. I think when you bring branding back to the human brand philosophy, then just like people, different people show up as either the more real version of themselves or the kind of fake version of themselves. And we tend to gravitate towards that realism and that authenticity. And I think we've been starved of that a lot, really, in recent decades through social media and through this, Instagram lifestyle and fake social profile. So we're kind of craving that authenticity. How can we use that authenticity to co-build the brands with our audience?
Yeah. So you ask, how do we do this? Very succinctly, first we listen. And we listen, and ideally we listen at scale. At Ipsos, we have a client in the alcohol category. We did a SMR paper with them 14 months ago now, so I can disclose this client is Pernod Ricard, and they have a wide range of alcoholic drinks. And what we did for Pernod Ricard is not only surveys, but also we ask participants, we ask consumers to send pictures of how and when they consume the alcohol. And from there, we could understand two important things. First, the words and the environment, the words people use to describe the product in their own words, and also the environment. And number two, what we call the moment of conviviality. meaning occasion. We want to understand how you consume alcohol in context. So this phase of listening and analyzing what people say, what people do, and in what context they consume your product is particularly important. From there, you will be able to tease out some keywords. You, meaning brand strategist, CMO, the marketer, you'll be able to tease out some keywords and code those keywords to understand how people describe your product and integrate those words in your communication. Now think about it. It makes it all the more authentic and relatable because you are now communicating with words, images, pictures, personalities, colors, sounds that have been inspired by your audience, yet conform to your brand playbook, meaning you pick and choose what you want the brand to stand for, if you will, as a marketer. So you see, that's what I mean by the co-creation process, whereby you can absorb, learn, listen from your audience and leverage those learnings to further articulate your brand while remaining in control of the big idea for your product.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And I guess really it's about creating that feedback loop and allowing that feedback loop to really evolve the brand over time. And I've seen this as well with McDonald's recently in the World Cup and their campaigns, kind of highlighting the different names that people from different companies use to say McDonald's, whether it was in Australia, they're called Maccas. In France, they're called McDo. In other places, it's Mickey D's. So that's a great example of how McDonald's are using that feedback loop to listen to what their audience is saying, to adopt their language, and to co-create with them. Is in terms of the work that you did with Pernod Ricard. What did opening that conversation look like? Is this simple outreach in terms of opportunities to kind of be engaged in the brand? How exactly did you open that feedback loop with this particular strategy?
Yeah, there was an appetite from Pernod Ricard to evolve the way they look at their products. Let me explain. The traditional way to look at a category is to analyze your product versus competitors. And in most categories, that's a marketer's view of the world, not a consumer's view of the world. Here's the deal. When you buy vodka, if you look at vodka from a marketer's standpoint, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to benchmark Grey Goose versus Belvedere versus Tito's versus Smirnoff. However, that's not how consumers shop for vodka. Consumers think, I have a 4th of July party. I have a 14th of July party. I have a dinner with friends. I have a catch up with my buddies from college, from university. I have a romantic dinner for two. Based on this occasion, that is how I'm going to shop for alcohol. Well, today I need to impress my in-laws. I'm going to buy champagne. This weekend, I'm hosting a barbecue in my backyard. So I'm going to need some beer, some seltzer, and some mixers. Oh, and on Saturday night, I'm hosting a party for a close friends. I'm going to need vodka, whiskey, and maybe some beer, and maybe some white and red wine. So what we teased out is those moments of conviviality, again, depending on not only how many people you gather with, but why do you gather with these people? And the occasion is more or less formal, informal, and is more or less important to you, if you will, depending on who you're trying to impress or not. And that's how people shop the category. But see, that's exactly where I come in. When in the introduction, Stephen, we said my perspective is from consumer psychology, not just being a brand strategist. And that's what I meant by understanding why do people do what they do. It's to discover that people certainly don't shop for vodka or whiskey for that matter in isolation. I mean, very few of them do. They do so in light of a moment of conviviality they are preparing for. So those are the key insights. Now, what did Pernod Ricard do with this? Well, every day they're using those, we call them MOCs, to market their products. And what's interesting here is it's a combination of data collection at scale, whereby we collect dozens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data points, pictures and surveys and social media and so on and so forth. And then some data science to process this information and determine what the keywords, the touch points, and the moments of conviviality should be.
Yeah, I love that. It's really using what the customer is already doing and saying, and giving them their content, their context, and their language back to them to make the brand more relatable, which I absolutely love. Now, in your book, Assemblage, you do touch on kind of mythological concepts and psychological concepts in and around anti-heroes, villains, and saviors. How do you see this as an integration for the way brands communicate to their customers?
Yes. So both in marketing and in pop culture, we are very familiar with the archetype of the hero. So the hero is Batman, the hero is Superman, the hero in advertising is Mr. Clean. And the hero is someone who has superpowers. In short, that's what a hero is about. I thought it'd be interesting to zoom in on the anti-heroes, the villains, and saviors. And that's because they are all relatable in their own ways. So an anti-hero is someone who can act heroically, yet has flaws. So think of Tony Soprano. Think of Don Draper in Mad Men. And we relate to anti-heroes because in a way they're like us, meaning they can be very talented. James Bond is an anti-hero. He's an anti-hero because he can save the world from evil at times, yet he's very flawed. He's obviously struggling with alcohol in particular, and his relationship to women is rather rocky at times, to put it this way, and it kills people. So that's an example of a very relatable anti-hero. And then villains, well, we want to side with the villain, again, because the villain has no friends, and we, in a way, feel sorry for the villain. And the savior, because the savior is going to save the world. So a villain is Dr. Evil, for example, or villains in James Bond. And saviors, modern day saviors, could be Jeff Bezos, or these days Elon Musk would like to be a savior and save Twitter, maybe, or if anything, save the world from global warming. So I thought it was interesting to zoom in on those archetypes and to then see how we implement them successfully in advertising. And indeed, what's interesting is how relatable they are. And you were talking, Stephen, about authenticity, the need of authenticity in advertising. And one great way to articulate authenticity to the audience is to show people and heroes that are not perfect.
Yeah, I completely, subscribe to this philosophy. And, I really like the anti-hero archetype, because really we connect to the flaws probably more than we do to the strengths, because we all see those flaws in ourselves. We can relate between the struggle of the flaw and the desire to do the right thing. And I think when we see those flaws, we're able to really trust that this person is showing up as their authentic self, because we've come from a period now where flaws are kept behind the scenes, and we're left with this polished version where we know it's not real. And as I said before, we've got this real craving for authenticity and for people to show up as the true version of themselves. How do you see that playing out in the coming decade or so? Because I've certainly seen a change in brands and how they communicate. We've touched a little earlier on the digital transformation and brands coming out from behind the curtain with social media because they had to. They couldn't not engage in the conversation anymore because customers were drawing them to the table through the conversations going on in social media. And that evolution has been huge over the past 10, 15 or so years. How do you see brands now evolving in the coming 10 to 15 years again, when we can already see the desire from consumers to want more authenticity, to want to see flaws, to want to see brands standing up for really what they believe in, and to not just walk the walk but talk the talk? Where do you see things going in the next 10 or so years with brands?
I think we're going towards more authenticity in a good way. A category that really exemplifies this shift, Stephen, is the beauty and apparel industry. Mm-hmm. Think about it this way. 5, 7, 10 years ago, we will see those perfect models in advertising, very skinny. Mm-hmm. Not to point fingers, but Victoria's Secret did this for years.
Yep.
Fast track to today, you see the success of an initiative like what Dove does, mm-hmm. the Real Beauty Project. That is to tell the market, tell the audience, it's okay if you don't weigh only 75 pounds. And it's okay if there are several forms of beauties, and what was traditionally seen as flaws, if you have moles or if you have, let's say, skin condition, for example, well, today that's a form of beauty. It's accepted as a form of beauty. And in that regard, the world is becoming more authentic and brands are becoming more relatable, because mm-hmm. now when I buy makeup or when I buy clothing apparel or when I buy anything that relates to my body, really, I no longer have to look exclusively like Kate Moss. I mm-hmm. can be myself and feel beautiful and have the brand help me transform. So that's the whole point of the book. Brands must transform people and the world they live in. Mm-hmm. What I expect from the brand is to take me from who I am to who I want to become. That's mm-hmm. the transformation. You're mm-hmm. going to transform me into someone who is beautiful, feels beautiful, and no longer has to compare with George Clooney, Brad Pitt, or Kate Moss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I talk extensively about Dove and their SelfEsteem Project and everything that they've done there, because I really believe that they were pioneers in that space, in really breaking the mold there. I believe the Real Beauty campaign debuted in 2004, which at this stage, that's knocking on 2 decades ago. So it's huge in terms of what they did back there then, and now us seeing other brands follow in their footsteps. There are so many examples of this happening now, and it's become the real norm. And the way that has changed just in the last 5 years or so in terms of inclusion and the mess. It's really giving consumers what they've been demanding for so long. And where I believe brands are going now, I know that there have been some teething issues in terms of brand washing and greenwashing, and brands trying to jump on bandwagon. So there is a lot of skepticism when brands kind of try to show up as an authentic version of themselves and try to stake a flag in the ground for the greater good. But I really do see brands taking on more of a role for change in the world, from to act as a voice for consumers, because we're not getting it from governments, we're not getting it from religious leaders to go out and make the changes that are necessary. And brands seem to have that clout, and they're pushing the message because they have that platform. Do you also believe that that's where we're going with brands, for them to become representatives of their people?
To me, that's the shift, Stephen. That's what is so important. In the 70s, brands, marketers were known for selling cigarettes and alcohol, basically. Fast tracking to today, there is a true opportunity for brands, and that's really, I covered this at length in the book, and I show brands how to make a positive contribution to economic recovery, to society, to the world around us. And 100%, not only should brands act more responsibly in the future, but I truly believe that marketers and brands have an opportunity here to do the right thing, to make a positive contribution. So it can be through initiatives such as educating people. For example, tech brands do this. Educate people, educate small businesses on how to use those digital tools. It can be around sustainability. And I'm thinking of brands like Levi's or Lululemon, whereby or IKEA in Europe, whereby you're encouraged to bring back an item that you used for a long time and give it a second life instead of discarding the item. And there are so many initiatives that I cover in the book. Of course, we're not going to cover them all, but the short answer to your question, to me, is indeed this shift from brands just force-feeding people with products they don't really need, to brands making a positive impact on society and the world at large.
Yeah, I 100% believe that's where we're going. And, you know, there's evidence to show that 100% that's where we're headed. In terms of the audience that I speak to, we tend to be brand strategists that deal with smaller companies. So entrepreneurs starting their business for the first time, launching new brands. How can small businesses adopt this? Because, of course, you know, Dove to be able to run the SelfEsteem Project, you know, there was massive research and development that went on before deciding to do that, and then even more budget thrown behind it to run campaigns and things like that. Starting out as businesses, you know, wanting to build a brand in the right way, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and put a stake in the ground to say that you're going to change the world. How can smaller brands kind of adopt this philosophy where they're communicating their ideals, you know, through their everyday interactions without kind of having a massive budget behind them to, you know, to kind of promote what they're talking about? Do you get what I'm saying? Because obviously, you know, we want to adopt this same philosophy as small businesses, but you know, it's kind of a bit of a contradiction, or we shouldn't really have the platform to say we're going to change the world when we're a small business just trying to make it in the world.
Not only I get what you're saying, but I have good news. I think authenticity is easier to achieve for smaller brands than it is for big ones. And here's why. If you just started a craft brewery business, or if you operate a family business with 40, 50 employees, well, that's easier to be relatable and to tell people, I'm like you and I come from your community and I'm here to make a great impact, than if you are Unilever, McDonald's or Coke. As everyone knows that you have dozens of thousands of locations across the world, and now you have to work hard to appear close to people and local. So authenticity, the good news for those of our listeners that are trying to build and grow their small brands, authenticity is really cheap to implement. It's what is your personal story? What is the story of your brand? How do you relate to your audience, to your community? And I'm really choosing those words carefully, to people, to audience, to community. I'm not even talking about consumers. From there, use those keywords, use those images, those colors, those stories in your communication, in the way you articulate your brand to your audience. Now, of course, you know what I described about Pernod Ricard before is sophisticated, if you will, and what I mean by this is, to your point, it's a big endeavor, right? Because there is some data science and all that. But again, there are plenty of examples in the book of small brands, very small brand startups that manage to leverage data, collect first-party data, and leverage this data to convey a message that is authentic and relatable. I know the word data might sound scary. The truth is, if you operate an independent store or an independent e-commerce platform and you collect email addresses, well, that's data. Mm-hmm. And that is not just data. That's a opportunity to connect with your audience. Mm-hmm. The only difference between you and Dove is you have a few dozens, maybe a few hundreds names, as opposed to hundreds of thousands. But conceptually, it is the same opportunity, and I would argue an easier path to success to mm-hmm. connect with your audience in a authentic and relatable fashion. It's easier mm-hmm. for you than it is for Unilever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, there's obviously, and obviously those who are interested in these concepts, go and grab yourself a copy of this book so you can dive deeper. And obviously we've been talking here about the likes of Pernod Ricard, we've been talking about Dove, and we've been talking about McDonald's. But just to kind of distill the lessons from this conversation for the learners and how they can go and apply this into their own business, I guess the message is start with authenticity and through that communication with your audience. Open up that feedback loop and open up your ears and listen to what they're saying and use their language in your communication to them, coupled with that authenticity, and you're on the road to building something really unique because you're making those real connections based on how we interact as people. So there are a lot of high level concepts that we can talk about and get lost in that high level, but when you really bring it down to the ground and how we can practically use these concepts in our day-to-day actions, it really starts with that authenticity. And I think a good way to do this would be to identify a couple of really important things. Identify the flaws that you want to show. So that anti-hero personality, they have flaws. What flaws are you prepared to kind of open up and maybe kind of put out there into the world to act as, that point of authenticity, that point of resonance? And then also, what kind of attributes are you going to show up with through that authenticity? Because really we're breaking into brand personality here, and this really is the opportunity to make those human connections. So is there anything else that we haven't covered? And obviously your book goes into a lot more detail than what we can chat about in 30 minutes. But are there any concepts that we haven't touched on that you would really want to kind of give to our listeners who are building brands for smaller businesses that they can take into their processes before we go?
I think you covered the gist of it. I think, again, the starting point, the overarching context is to keep in mind that people don't need more brands. People don't seek more products. There are very few brands that command this adoration, if you will. We like to talk about people lined up in front of Apple stores waiting for the next iPhone. Mm-hmm. Well, that's cute, but it's very anecdotal. The truth is, maybe Louis Vuitton is one, maybe Ferrari is one, but you have very, very few brands where people are that devoted. Start from mm-hmm. the assumption, or rather the painful assumption, that your brand is not that important to people. From there, build on this emotional connection with your audience. And that's really your opportunity. Realize to do so, you realize that most people don't care about most brands. What people care is they care about themselves, and they care about mm-hmm. transforming. And what I mean by transforming is go from whoever I am to who I want to become. Your brand mm-hmm. is the tool they need to become the hero. The hero is the consumer. The hero is not your brand. Your brand is going to mm-hmm. facilitate this transformation from who am I to who I want to become. And is going to facilitate this transformation of you're going to re-energize my local community, help with economic recovery after COVID and during the recession, help with saving the environment. That's where your brand comes in. That's your starting point, and that's how you build a brand at scale, whether you start with $100 million, like the large ones we spoke about, or $100.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I'm really looking forward to exploring your perspective on these concepts, because I've been exposed to these concepts and used a lot of these concepts for quite a while. But I love when someone comes to the table with a fresh perspective on it, because it kind of illuminates that 3D side of things, and you can always pick up something new. So I'm definitely looking forward to receiving a copy of your book. I know you sent that out to me. Where can people get a hold of you if they have questions about any of these topics, or they want to go out and grab any of your books?
Thank you, Stephen. The book is called Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation, and it's available on Amazon. It's also available at Barnes & Noble, and various bookstores. Amazon is probably the easiest way to order the book. And again, my name is Emmanuel Probst, and people can find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to further discuss with our listeners today and start a new connection here.
Absolutely. Emmanuel, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's an area that I'm fascinated about, that I love diving into. I know a lot of our listeners really have a fascination into the science and psychology about what we're doing, why we're doing it, because it goes beyond that whole marketing and messaging side of things that our industry has been associated with. And I know that people like you, pioneers like you, bringing out this information into the world, help us understand our role as brand builders all that better. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me, and I hope to catch up with you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me on the show, and thank you for everyone for listening in today.
Thanks again. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to learn more brand strategy techniques to level up your skills, make sure you check out brandmasteracademy.com. There's plenty of free resources and premium content for you to download and get you going. If you'd like to join our Facebook group full of like-minded brand strategists, all learning from each other, then find us by searching for the Brand Strategy Community, where you can find exclusive content for members as well. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to give us an honest review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listened, and make sure you tune in for the next episode of the Brandmaster Podcast.